Hello everyone, thank you for coming to listen to little old me. Hopefully you will find it enlightening, and also I hope you will find it disturbing, because unless you find this disturbing and that you allow that emotion to fill you up and motivate you to enact change, this will continue to actually get quite worse. So what is it that I'm talking about here? Bubble zone laws, which are in the law called safe access zones, as in safe, so you can safely access abortion. They are areas around the private property of hospitals, abortion clinics, quote-unquote clinics, pharmacies, and the houses or offices of abortionists or pharmacists now who might provide the abortion pill. And the idea of these bubbles is that you cannot in any way speak or act in such a manner that a woman who is going to have an abortion might change her mind. Now, this doesn't just mean talking to a woman. This could mean wearing a pro-life t-shirt. This could mean holding a pro-life sign. This could mean kneeling on the sidewalk and praying. Not talking to anyone else, not even talking out loud, but because the physical act of praying there may cause a woman to change her mind, you have now broken the law. I ran afoul of these bubble zone laws 6 years ago when I was still a university student. I organized a 40 Days for Life prayer campaign outside of the hospital where abortions were committed, about a 15-minute walk from the university I attended. So I would go in between classes and I would pray for an hour and sometimes more outside of the hospital there. And doing so, I would encounter other university students who were quite mad at me. One of them went to her MLA, that's a member of the Legislative Assembly in Nova Scotia, and said, you need to do something about these people out there praying. They're intimidating women, they're harassing women. And next thing you know, we have a bill proposed to create safe access zones. And that was when I learned what these even were. We've only really begun talking about them around the 2010s. But actually, the very first bubble zone law in Canada came out in '95 in BC. And it was done in response to an abortionist who was assassinated. And they used it as an excuse. And that's not to minimize the great tragedy that is murder, but I say they use it as an excuse because anyone who's willing to murder you is not going to care about violating a bubble zone, which is a comparatively minimal crime, than murder. And because it doesn't stop you from killing someone. But what it does stop you doing is offering alternative solutions to someone in a crisis. And it does so discriminatorily. Because if I go in there wearing a pro-choice t-shirt, I am not breaking the law. It discriminates exclusively against people of a certain opinion or a certain religious belief, or someone, quite frankly, who is more scientifically knowledgeable, because we all know where life begins if you study the science, which we claim we're supposed to be doing, following the science. The things they claim we're doing, harassing women, intimidating them, besetting them, is already illegal under the Criminal Code of Canada. And so when this bill was put forward in Nova Scotia, I went before the Committee on Law Amendments and I told them so. I said, look, if we were doing everything they were accusing us of doing, you could arrest us already. It's already illegal to do that. Those things should be illegal, and I don't contest that. But if I were doing them, I would already be facing criminal charges, because those things are already criminal. What this is doing is it's using a tragedy, or the fear of that this tragedy might be repeated, to discriminate against law-abiding, compassionate citizens who want to help women in a crisis. Naturally, they didn't listen, and the law was passed. It went through first reading, second reading, onto royal assent within 8 days. It was rammed through. This absolutely shocked me because it made it clear that they did not care about ascertaining what was actually happening. They did not even care what the data said, because I also pointed out that the notion that we're violent is untrue, because Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada's own data said that over the last 20 years since this great tragedy happened, there had been no significant pro-life violence, not one. Not an incident in 20 years, and yet they felt the need to justify doing this. I pointed out that it violated freedom of right, our freedom of expression, our freedom of assembly, our freedom of religion. However, the Canadian Constitution is a very weak one, and so the Charter of Rights and Freedoms has Section 1, which says that these rights, which we listed out afterwards, can be restricted if it is to a reasonable level. If it's deemed reasonable, we can create laws to violate these rights. So what is reasonable and how do we determine it in a country with a constitution that's as weak as ours? I believe for it to be reasonable, it must apply to everyone. So for example, my freedom of speech, I think, could be justly held in check if I get a boombox out at 1 a.m. in a suburb and start yelling curses at the top of my lungs for no good reason and waking everyone up. There's no need for me to do that, and it would apply to anyone of any belief, in any age, of any culture, or any kind of background. However, when you create a bubble zone, what you are doing is discriminating against one group or idea because you don't like it and you find it uncomfortable. That is how you can know it's unreasonable. And this is what is the danger for the future. Because what is the premise that's being used here? If the premise, and this was a premise that was given to me when I went before the Committee on Law Amendments, is because this is emotional violence, because this makes us emotionally uncomfortable, we have a right to protect people from this and create a bubble zone. But what about the day when something is emotionally uncomfortable on a different subject matter? There are many controversial topics and issues today that don't even have to do with abortion. If that's the premise you're using, you can expand abortion zones to cover, so safe access zones to cover any topic that's uncomfortable in any location. You can expand them infinitely until anything that doesn't want to get talked about by those in power can't get talked about. I predicted this when the bubble zone laws passed in Nova Scotia, and the very next year, bubble zone laws were expanded to include now speaking out against the COVID vaccine. And I wrote in a letter, because I couldn't even go for the Committee on Law Amendments because I was unvaccinated, saying, I predicted this would happen last year. If you continue with this rhetoric, you will end up being the ones muzzled in the future. Then Newfoundland and Labrador, a couple years later, they expanded safe access zones now to go around schools, so that you cannot talk about any controversial issue, not just about abortion, but about healthcare, and about what's happening to your children. Just a couple weeks ago, before I came here, in Newfoundland and Labrador, there was a new policy regarding bathrooms that was implemented in the school. I have not read the policy to know if I agree with it or disagree with it, but it doesn't matter. The parents who send their children to that school were told they could not protest in front of that school upon pain of arrest. Thousands of dollars in fines, and if they cannot or will not pay it, at least 6 months in prison is what they're facing for protesting what their own children are being taught in school. This is the future if we do not stand up and say this is wrong, unjust, and an egregious violation of our human rights. And because we are silent on this and are being silenced on this, women who are in a crisis, who deserve access to information and the right to make a free and informed choice, are being denied that right in the name of their defense. And their blood is on the hands of lawmakers who create these laws and those who refuse to speak out against them. Thank you.